Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Recently, the director of the superhero movie Logan took a shot at the approach that Kevin Feige is using for the Marvel Cinematic Universe regarding the multiverse and the whole storyline of the multiverse saga. Now, in a recent interview as related to the premiere of the new Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, the director of Logan, James Mangold, said that the multiverse approach that Kevin Feige has used as part of Phase 4, and Phase 5, Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the death of storytelling. Now, this is a very troubling statement from a filmmaker to make because James Mangold was the director of a superhero movie, Logan, that is considered to be one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, ranking up there with films like the Joker movie and The Dark Knight as one of the films that basically shows you that superhero movies can be on that level artistically with Academy Award-winning films. And when you have an Academy Award standard level director like James Mangold, who has directed a superhero movie, telling everyone that an approach to storytelling is the death of storytelling, then you really need to take that seriously, because this whole multiverse approach, basically, as I see it, is the death of storytelling. And it's the death of storytelling because it basically makes it where audiences never have to answer that critical question that screenwriters like myself have to answer before we put fingers to the keyboard, and that question is, why should we care? And everybody who is a screenwriter has to answer that question, because if the audience has no reason to care, then there's no reason to really take time to put fingers to the keyboard to write that story, and there's no reason to go out here and watch that story, because if there's no reason to care about anything that you've watched, then you're basically wasting your time. And that's what multiverses basically do. It basically kills the audience's reason to care. It kills the audience's reason to care about anything in a story, because nothing in a story really has any sort of resonance and no real reason for the audience to resonate as related to anything that they've watched, because everything in a multiverse basically has no lesson for the audience to learn and no real stakes as related to the outcome. Because when in a story, you have to have several things. One, you have to have a message in your story as related to a lesson that the audience has to learn, and you also have to have stakes to drive the conflict, and the stakes need to be high in order for the audience to invest in that story emotionally. You need these elements in a story for a story to work, but when you have a multiverse, you basically lose your stakes that incentivize the audience to keep watching, and you also negate any lesson that you're trying to teach as related to that story. Because when you have a multiverse, the audience, if they are not satisfied with that story, what they can do is go into alternate worlds to see the outcome that they want to see, and they can go to these alternate worlds to go see the outcomes that they want, and never really invest in the stakes of that story, and never really learn the lesson that the author or the screenwriter is trying to present to the audience. And that's where storytelling dies. It dies because when you go out here and make it where there are an infinite number of outcomes, there's no reason to invest in the one that the author or the screenwriter, or in the case of a director like James Mangold, you can't really get people to invest in the message of your story. And that makes it where that story doesn't, people don't really need to care about it. So when I listen to James Mangold, again, here is a critically acclaimed filmmaker who has made one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, saying that multiverses are the death of storytelling. I have to agree with him, because as a writer who has gone out here and been studying the craft of writing and has written not over about 8 or 9 novels and written over 80 books overall, I know that when you're building a universe like I have with the SJS Direct universe, you need things to persuade the audience to care. And one of the things that you need is a continuity of storytelling that people can invest in as related to the elements of the story, and you have to put elements in that story that are consistent in order to make people care about what's going on in that world. Because if they don't care about anything in that world, because the writers don't see anything having value, then they don't need to invest their time in watching it. Because if you've got a world where everything basically can change at the drop of a hat, as related to the writers just saying, hey, this character, what happened to them does not matter, then why should the audience care about watching that program or reading that book if the director or the writers are deciding to just go to another world and show us the outcome that goes there? Now, this whole approach of multiverses basically is something that has been put into comics, and it's been used for years whenever a comic book writer basically paints themselves into a corner. What they'll do is go to an alternate world, and as they go to the alternate world, they go out here and use that alternative to basically try to back themselves out of a corner as related to a storyline that was not working. And writers like Chris Claremont are notorious for using this approach during his X-Men run, and it's been used quite a few times to get writers out of a corner that they paint themselves in, not only in comics, but it's also been used in soap operas. But this type of approach to writing is just a lazy approach from bad writers. And when you do this in cinema, it really damages cinema, because if you have a multiverse approaches basically are where a writer shows that they have no real creativity. No, it's something that writers do when they basically have run out of ideas. And when they run out of ideas and they start to get desperate, what they do is go out here and look to explore alternate worlds. They look to explore these alternate worlds because they feel like they have no alternative. And as they get desperate, they look to use these alternate worlds as a way to basically back themselves out of the corner that they wound up painting themselves in. Because when you have a writer sometimes and they're working on things like a run of stories, a lot of writers basically, when they get jammed up, what they do is start getting desperate, and that's where we get several plot devices that I know are a sign of desperation. One is time travel. That's one approach that is one that writers start to use when they get desperate. Another one is alternate universes. Alternate universes and multiverse approaches basically are something that writers use to try to get back themselves out of a corner that they've painted themselves in. And when I look at Kevin Feige and his approach to the multiverse saga, it basically shows me how desperate he is to get out of the corner he painted himself in as related to the Infinity Saga, where he basically wound up killing off many of the popular characters that made the MCU popular. And because he basically painted himself into this corner by killing Tony Stark in Avengers Endgame and aging out Steve Rogers, he now realizes that he basically needed those characters to be lead characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And with him needing those characters to be lead characters again, to be the guide that would lead to the big box office and allow them to continue maintaining the MCU, what he's done is gone out here and create this multiverse saga that basically started with Phase 4, which is rudderless and directionless. And this rudderless, directionless Phase 4 and Phase 5, Fail 5, basically are in a place where the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going nowhere as they try to find a way out of the whole story of the Infinity Saga so that they can continue making superhero movies. Unfortunately, as they try to continue making superhero movies to keep the profits rolling in at Disney, what's happened here is that as they've gotten desperate, the whole MCU's structure has fallen apart, and as it has fallen apart, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is dying as related to being a place to tell stories because there's no reason to care. There's been no reason to care because a lot of the stories that they wanted to do as part of Phase 4, like Eternals and Thor Love and Blunder and the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, just have not really been able to reach audiences, and they haven't been able to reach audiences because there's no story to care about, there's no stakes and risk as related to the story, and there's no real message for that story and no hero to root for, because when you have a multiverse, you have so many options as related to story. You don't have to invest in any single character, and since you don't have to invest in any single character or their stories, then there's no real reason to care. And again, that's what leads to the death of storytelling, because storytelling is all about us being able to connect to people in the real world and connect us to their experiences in their story. That's what storytelling is all about. It's about people telling stories about people. Unfortunately, when it comes to the superhero movies have basically commodified the story, and as a commodified story, they want to make sure that the only outcome that they get is box office, and if a story doesn't really get them the box office, what they want to do is go to another world, like they did with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. They want to go to different worlds to get a story, but the whole thing is stories only work in one world. Stories only work in the world of a lead character, and that's where you run into the flaws as related to interconnected universes, because we can't invest in just the story of one person. We can't really invest that much in the story of one person because we have this whole big world of people, and we really cannot just really look at that world of one person and see life from their perspective. And that's what makes cinema special for people. It makes it special for people because we get to see the life of one person, like what James Mangold was trying to show us with the last days of the life of Logan. With the last days of the life of Logan in the movie Logan, this was all about a hero basically in his last days looking to go out here and build a legacy and basically thinking and contemplating about life. That is what made Logan one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, and that movie's whole message basically winds up getting negated and even trivialized by the Deadpool and Wolverine movie. Yeah, we got a movie with Wolverine in his costume, but sadly we don't get any of the depth and layers of Logan. Basically, all of that is negated, and instead of us caring about Logan on that human level, like we did with 2017's Logan, what we get is a very shallow movie in Deadpool and Wolverine that basically just infantilizes the character and shows us a world of different worlds that basically trivializes the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe and makes it where things like Tony Stark's sacrifice in the Infinity Saga no longer have any value, because we can just go to another world, go find another Tony Stark, and basically everything that we saw in those movies no longer matters anymore. And that's where the problem is with this multiverse approach. This multiverse approach basically makes it where the audience has no real reason to care about superhero movies or movies in general. Multiverses basically suck the life and the fun out of storytelling because if the audience doesn't like an ending, they can just go make another movie with another ending, and that's not how life works. No, in life, basically we have one life and we have one outcome, and that's where the stakes in life get high, and that's where we have to care. And again, I could not stand being in a multiverse as related to storytelling because it really sucks the life out of the story. As a guy who built his own universe in the SJS Direct universe, one of the things I try to avoid is the desperation to go to an alternate universe because I understand that alternate universe stories basically are something that writers explore when they're running out of ideas, and they really take away from the stakes of the story. So I try to avoid using those type of devices. Now, I have done time travel stories in the past, like Esteem the Sands of Time and Blast from the Past, and I do them sparingly because I understand I don't want them to have an impact on the whole universe. I just show them as being anomalies, and anomalies that basically have to be erased because I want the emotional impact to remain on the stories that I'm creating, and I want to show the impact of the time and again things and on people because I understand that storytelling has to take place in the world of one person at one time, and that's what leads to the high stakes that make you care. I understand that this leads to the stakes being high and makes you care because when you have writers who again are using these kind of plot devices, it basically means that the series is basically over, and what they want to do is continue milking the series for money, and that's what Kevin Feige wants to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, continue to milk the franchise for Disney so they can continue to make more money. But sadly, as they've gone on this multiverse approach, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe has been dying with box office failure after box office failure. And yes, Deadpool and Wolverine will get people's attention like a 90s gimmick comic. It'll get your attention like a 90s gimmick comic, but the storytelling and the approach to storytelling has basically died, similar to the way The Simpsons died in 2000 when they were in their 9th season, but they'll continue to try to milk it because they want to keep making money. And as again, this greed basically leads to a creative poverty. Creative poverty leads to desperation, and that desperation basically leads to the death of storytelling. And it's really sad that you have a filmmaker who made a superhero movie trying to warn them, similar to the way Martin Scorsese said that, superhero movies are the death of cinema. And when I look at superhero movies, and again, I've been a comic fan since I was 4 years old, but I've also loved film. And film is dying because of this greed for superhero movie box office, and we're losing storytelling, we're losing the ability to go out here and make those snapshot pictures of life. Superhero movies are basically killing Hollywood, but because Hollywood's executives are basically acting like a bunch of drug addicts, these drug addicts basically addicted to box office and addicted to money can't see how these superhero movies are killing their business because we've lost a decade and a half of creativity. We've lost a decade and a half of stories, lost a decade and a half of giving us those snapshots of life. And I couldn't really, again, live in a world of these kind of movies where you've had a multiverse. I mean, imagine a multiverse where the film The Last American Virgin didn't have the ending it did. I mean, imagine a world where you could basically eradicate the whole thing that happened where Gary found out that Karen went back to Rick. I mean, imagine that, because that took all the emotional resonance out of Last American Virgin. Imagine a world where in Sunset Boulevard, Norma Desmond doesn't shoot Joe Gillis and continues to remain in her state of delusion. I mean, you take all the emotional resonance out of these movies if you have a multiverse approach. I mean, those films, you can't care about them because oh, the people, if things don't work my way, it doesn't matter because I can go someplace else. This is the approach of a spoiled brat who doesn't want to grow as related to their craft, and that's the sad state of affairs of the modern superhero movie. It's run by a bunch of older individuals who basically are growing old but don't want to grow up and don't want the craft of movies to grow. And instead of us getting those rich multidimensional movies like Logan, we're getting shallow cartoons come to life with Deadpool and Wolverine. And that's the sad state of affairs of filmmaking, that we're losing story, and we're losing stories about people, and just getting live action cartoons that are basically on a child's level and not getting anything that stimulates your intellect. That's what's really sad here. And again, as a writer who looks to grow in his craft and looks to develop better stories, I look at the whole multiverse approach, and I'm not a fan of multiverses because multiverses mean that creators are out of ideas and know nothing about how to tell a story. Because when you go to a multiverse, it's because you've basically finished your story. And with you finishing the story, you want to go and create some more stories, but there's no more stories to make, so you just start reaching in desperation and start creating convoluted stuff. No, stories have an ending, and once a story ends, what makes it special is leaving that story to end. That's what made the original trilogy for Star Wars so great, is we let the story end. And many creators, you have to understand where to end a story. You have to know when a story is over. That's something that I understand as a writer. There's a point where a story has to end, and once you end a story, you can go on and do something better. I mean, I would rather end a story and then begin a new one rather than go out here and try to keep a story going once that story finishes. Because if I stretch a story out too long, like what they did with the new Batman franchise, the Batman, you basically lose your message. So when it comes to storytelling, you have to know that everything has to end in order for something to begin. And the sad part with today's superhero filmmakers is they don't know when to let something end because of their greed for money. They don't know when to let something end so that they can go on to begin something great. That's the whole sad state of affairs with superhero movies, and that's what's leading to the death of storytelling. Nobody knows when to let something end because, as I see it, the superhero movie ended in 2019 with Avengers Endgame, and it should have ended there, and Hollywood should have been focusing on creating some new stories. But instead of focusing on new stories and moving on, they refused to let the superhero movie era end so that they could begin a new era of greatness. And that's the whole sad part of this whole thing as related to Hollywood's sad state of affairs, as related to their approach to storytelling these days. Now, if you want to check out the stories of the SJS Direct Universe, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can check out the ISIS series, the Steam series, and the John Haynes series, not to mention the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, Thetas, my vampire novel, Eternal Night, and you can also pick up other great stories on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft Digital, Google Play, and you can find them at big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to try out my first digital comic, A Steam No Good Deed, you can find it on Kindle for 99 cents on Amazon.com, along with the SJS Direct Universe books. And if you want to try out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com and get that comic for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to help me be able to continue making more publications in the SJS Direct Universe, or help me to be able to develop the next full SJS Direct comic, or be able to buy more great comics from indie creators, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.